Hey guys, it's Eva. Welcome back to my channel. So I have a master's degree in book publishing. I worked as a freelance book editor. I'm writing a book myself, and I'm also an avid reader. And I do have to say that I probably haven't cried reading a book Kim Kardashian style since I last read Mockingjay and Between Shades of Grey. And today I'm sitting down to talk about a book that finally broke my non-sobbing streak. And as you can probably tell from the title of this video and the thumbnail, that book is going to be Sunrise on the Reaping by Suzanne Collins. This is an ASMR channel and I typically make whispered videos, but because this book series is so beloved by a lot of different people, I wanted to make this discussion and this very in-depth deep dive a bit more accessible in case you don't enjoy whispered ASMR content. So I'm going to try to go more so the soft spoken route, just to make it where more people can watch this video and enjoy it. I do want to break this video up into a few different parts. So in this video, we'll talk about my personal experience with the Hunger Games series. We'll do a Sunrise on the Reaping deep dive and analysis. Then I want to talk about a couple of different plot lines and characters within the book. For example, the Katniss and Haymitch parallels, and I actually also did a bit of a deep dive into the Raven, the poem that is so heavily featured in Sunrise on the Reaping, and I found some very cool parallels in there too. So I want to also talk about how the Raven, the poem, connects back to the book, and then we'll have some closing thoughts and that'll be the end of it. So I think this video is going to be pretty lengthy, so I invite you to get yourself a drink. I made myself a cup of tea in my pivot mug, so grab a drink, get cozy, and let's get into it. So I am terrible when it comes to remembering dates. I mean, abysmally terrible. So I made myself a little cheat sheet to remember. The Hunger Games came out in 2008. Catching Fire came out in 2009. And then lastly, Mockingjay, which is the last book of the original trilogy, came out in 2010. So I got into the Hunger Games a little bit late, meaning I think that the first two books had already come out, and in 2008 and 2009 I was in high school. By the time that Mockingjay came out in 2010, I was either about to graduate from high school or I was already entering college. When the original trilogy first came out, it was definitely a very pivotal time in my life. Also in college, I studied media analysis and I took a lot of classes that were focused on looking into how the media portrays certain events and how what you see on the news, on all of these TV shows, what the headlines that you see in the papers, you have to take it with a grain of salt and always look into what sort of an angle the story is being told from. So I feel like these books really opened up my mind, and they also came at the perfect time because I was already in the headspace of looking into everything around me through a very analytical lens. And within the original trilogy, maybe it wasn't so heavily featured as it is in Sunrise on the Reaping, but the topic of propaganda definitely comes up a lot, especially in Mockingjay. So it was just a very interesting time for me to be reading these books and for me to be studying what I was studying, because it was all converging in this very interesting way. The movies started coming out and I was obsessed. I do know that some people weren't too thrilled with Mockingjay, the book, and also the book then being split into two separate movies. But to me, I was like, the more Hunger Games content, the better. So I was thrilled. And then we did not get a new Hunger Games book until 2020. And if you lived on this earth at that time, you know that 2020 was a very tumultuous time. It was the Rona days, and the world was very discombobulated, a lot of confusion, a lot of sadness and pain, and we just didn't know what was to come. And I guess that was partly why when I first got my copy of The Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes, which was President Coriolanus Snow's story, I read maybe the first 5 chapters and then I had to put the book down. And I think it was equal parts of me not connecting to a story, and then also, again, it was such a bleak and such a sad time to actually live in that I don't think I wanted to also plunge myself into a fictional world that was equally, if not more, bleak and terrifying, and just filled with people making awful decisions for other people. So I took a break from the Hunger Games world, and I did not read The Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes until the movie news started coming out, because I knew that I was going to be watching the movie for sure, and I wanted to read the book beforehand. So I still felt like it was a bit difficult for me to get into the story reading it, so I ended up getting the book on Audible. Snow is a villain, and it's already pretty challenging to be in the villain's head for the entirety of the story. You would think that it'd be even more challenging to have said villain tell his story to you, but actually listening to the audiobook was so much easier, and I ended up enjoying the book a lot. I know that some people do not, rank it high when it comes to all of the Hunger Games books, but I want to say I probably enjoyed it more than Mockingjay, so I really personally liked it. People were very, very much interested in Suzanne Collins giving us Haymitch's story, because obviously Haymitch, who is very prominent in the first 3 Hunger Games books, we know that he is a victor, and he obviously participated in his own Hunger Games, and people were so curious to know what happened there. It was also the first prequel, which is like a special Hunger Games where they do something even more, terrible than they typically do on like a regular year. So I feel like Haymitch's story was the story that people wanted the most. And I'm not sure if Suzanne Collins already had a plan to write the story, or if she simply listened and wrote the book for all of us Haymitch fans, but the book is now in our hands, and there it is. As terrible as I am with telling what year something happened in, I am even more terrible at giving a concise synopsis of something, which I think is really going to trip me up when I finally finish editing my own novel and I have to write a query letter, and because it has to be pretty concise and pretty to the point, and yeah, I think I'm going to struggle a lot with that, but we're not there yet. But if I had to explain what Sunrise on the Reaping is in a very, very concise manner, I would say that this is Haymitch Abernathy's story. We follow Haymitch Abernathy into his own Hunger Games, and this is also the rebellion's first attempt at a revolution that then Katniss and the team that helps her end up carrying out successfully in Mockingjay. Happy birthday, Haymitch. The upside of being born on Reaping Day is that you can sleep late on your birthday. It's pretty much downhill from there. So that pretty much sums up exactly how this book opens, because it is Haymitch's 16th birthday, and his birthday also falls on Reaping Day. If you read the books and watched the movies, you know that Reaping Day is when the Capitol chooses one girl and one boy from each district, and then they end up going to the Hunger Games where they fight to death, and then there is one victor. And it's basically a way to punish the 12 districts because of the war that took place and the Capitol won. So yes, this is definitely not the best day to be born, but Haymitch is actually a very positive guy, and even though obviously he lives in District 12 and the way of life is not the easiest because people don't have the resources, people really have to find ways to make money to feed their families, he's still able to grasp onto different things that are part of his life to bring him happiness. His mother, his younger brother Sid, and also his love, his girlfriend Lenore Dove. So right off the bat, you can see that Haymitch has a very similar family structure to Katniss, and we're going to talk about the similarities and the parallels in a different part of this video. But essentially this is what Haymitch's life is like. He lives with his ma and Sid, and then he also has a job working with Hattie, who supplies the district with alcohol, which is actually an illegal endeavor, but it is what it is. Haymitch is head over heels for Lenore Dove, who is actually Covey. So she is Covey just like Lucy Gray was. So there's that connection there. And she loves music, she loves poetry, she loves books. She is beautiful, and she also has this rebellious streak. She's been arrested twice before. I don't think she's ever been like actually charged with anything. Haymitch, I think, definitely suspects that she did in fact do the things. Everybody is getting ready for the reaping ceremony, but Haymitch is able to still get some alone time with Lenore Dove before everything happens, and she ends up giving him a gift for his birthday, and the gift is actually on the cover of the book. So this is a flint striker. I was not familiar with this term before I read the book, but it is actually an object or a tool that can help you make fire, which again relates back to, you could say, the original trilogy, with Katniss being the girl on fire and the Mockingjay and so on and so forth. So there's definitely a fire theme running across all of these books. So then we transition into the actual reaping ceremony, and we do not have Effie trinket there just yet, because obviously this is many years before the Katniss's Hunger Games, and Haymitch again is 16, so obviously Effie is much younger too. But in place of Effie, we have Drusilla, who is one of the most infuriating characters because she's just mean to the bone. She is treating the children of the district as animals, and there's actually a running theme throughout this entire book of the kids and just the people of the districts being viewed as beasts, as something other than human. The Capitol people not only see them as dangerous and as beings who need to be punished, but also as something completely separate from them mentally and physically, which is extremely unsettling to read about, because there is a point where Haymitch points out how they talk about his hands and his nails as claws and his hair as fur, so very much likening him and the rest of the tributes to animals. Like I mentioned, this is the 50th Hunger Games, which they call the prequel. So they want to spice things up, do something even more terrible than they usually do. And the spice that they end up going with is that instead of the typical 2 tributes per district, they end up reaping 4 people, meaning 2 girls and 2 boys from each of the 12 districts. So it's double the kids and double the families who are going to be losing their children this year. I was expecting Haymitch to be reaped right away, but there is actually a bit of a twist in this part of the story because they do end up reaping 4 kids, but Haymitch is actually not one of them, at least not right off the bat. So the 4 kids that end up being reaped are Woodbine, Luella, Maisie, and Wyatt. And what ends up happening is that Woodbine ends up getting scared, or he simply does not want to give the capital the control, meaning he doesn't want to be killed in the games. He would prefer to die on his own terms. But he ends up running and he ends up getting shot, and then there is a huge commotion and Haymitch ends up jumping into the action. And because the capital can never appear weak and there can never be a sense of the capital making mistakes or the districts somehow outsmarting the capital, they have to still send 4 tributes from District 12. Obviously they're televising these reapings, and we learn that the video is on a bit of a delay, so they have some time to essentially rework the narrative. And this is where Plutarch Heavensbee comes in. We meet Plutarch in, I believe, Catching Fire is the first book that he appears in the original trilogy. And Plutarch is there to, again, essentially create the narrative. Anything the country ends up seeing on their TV screens, he's responsible for putting together in such a way that, again, makes the capital look like it's in control, and by extension making Snow look like he's in control. So Plutarch and Drusilla both navigate this unexpected turn of events, and they make it seem like, again, Luella, Maisie, Wyatt, and Haymitch were reaped. Nobody ran, nobody got shot, nobody resisted the status quo. Speaking of propaganda and the narrative, this was actually one of the most difficult things to read. Obviously, there are many parts in this book that are just so heart-wrenching, and I was, again, sobbing, sitting on my bed and just tears falling down. But Plutarch Heavensbee having to get reaction shots from Haymitch's family to make him being reaped believable. When their son is already being taken, he will likely not come home. That was psychologically so difficult for me to read and to digest, because Plutarch, even though he seems to be kind, at least compared to people like Drusilla, he is still asking a mother and a brother, a small child, to feel the pain that they're feeling because this is actually happening, but to also act different things out for the camera, for the sake of the capital, knowing that, these performances are going to be used in the propaganda that's then going to perpetuate the need to, and when I say the need, I mean the need to have these games continue. It's all part of the machine. I can't even imagine how difficult it must have been for them to realize that they have to do this, because if they don't, they might be punished. Haymitch might be punished even more, and they don't have the luxury of saying no. So it hit me so hard reading the book, and I think it's going to hit me even harder watching the movie, watching the scene take place in the movie. Like I mentioned, the topic of propaganda and the narrative really is very, very heavily featured in Sunrise on the Reaping, and this is one of the first instances of it being presented to you as the reader, just how hard they go, and how they don't really care about people's feelings and humanity, and they are going to put you on the spot and make you act when your actual child, your blood, is being taken essentially to slaughter. So the 4 tributes are then taken, and it pretty much follows the same pattern. Maybe the train is not as fancy and the accommodations are not as fancy as they were in Katniss and Peeta's Hunger Games, but I think they're definitely better than what they were in Lucy Gray and Snow's Hunger Games, because that was the very beginning. But obviously none of it compensates for the fact that they are going to be treated as, again, something other than human, and they will have to kill and they will likely die. So we then get to learn a bit more about the other 3 tributes, and I do have to say that this book has some of my favorite characters in the entire Hunger Games series, but also this book made me experience just some of the worst loss, and not to say that, you know, losing Rue and losing Prim was any easier, because it wasn't, but there was just something extra horrifying about getting to know these children and then knowing that they were not going to make it. So let's honor them and talk about them in a bit more detail. So there is Wyatt, and unlike me, he's very good at math and statistics, and he is essentially helping everybody figure out whose odds are the best. But he doesn't have, or actually his family doesn't have, the best reputation in the district, so there is a bit of animosity there. I feel like Haymitch doesn't really like most of the other tributes, with the exception of Luella, but then obviously over the course of them being together and going through this together, they end up getting closer. Then we have Maisie, and I think she's one of my favorite tributes ever, and that is because I love how she does not give, and excuse my French, 2 shits about the Capitol. She stays true to exactly who she is. She puts everybody in their place. I think she knows that she's not going to make it, but if she has to go, I think it's really important to Maisie to go with her sanity and her person still intact. So I love how she doesn't act impressed by the food and the luxury when they're on the train and she's making demands. I love the fact that she stands up to Drusilla, and when Drusilla puts hands on Maisie returns the favor right away, and she was just a very spunky, unapologetic character. She knew what she liked. She was into jewelry and pretty things, and she was very blunt, but I feel like the bluntness, the way that she used it preparing for the games, when it came to the other tributes, their allies especially, she was able to help them, and she was able to make them feel seen, even though the way that Haymitch originally described Maisie was that she was like a very prissy girl, kind of stuck up, but I feel like you got to see a very different side of Maisie when she was preparing for the games and then when she was actually in the games. And I think that Haymitch ended up connecting to Maisie throughout their time together. And what's also extremely heartbreaking about Maisie in specific is that Maisie is a twin. So she has a twin sister who's still in District 12. And there is a very heartbreaking scene at the end of the book when Haymitch eventually returns back home, when he mistakes the twin sister for Maisie, and it breaks your heart reading it. So yeah, so that is Maisley. Then we have to talk about Luella. So Luella's story is, I'm gonna try not to cry, but this story hit me the hardest. She is adorable, she's innocent, just like all of the other kids, but there's just something about Luella that made me feel very protective over her, and I think Haymitch has that same feeling toward Luella, and actually toward any younger child in this book, which I think is why he ends up connecting so well with Katniss down the line. Haymitch really likes her. He calls Luella a sweetheart, and she's a very sweet kid. And even though Haymitch doesn't really originally want to become allies with anyone, he ends up wanting to become allies with Luella so that they, or actually more so that he can protect Luella as much as he can. We'll talk about Luella's fate in a few minutes. The gist of what happens after is very similar to what Katniss and Peeta go through. They have to go through the training, they have to go through getting dressed up, and they have a very, very lousy stylist. I mean, he's definitely no Cinna, and this is actually where the actual Effie trinket comes in. Her sister, who is a student at that time, she's supposed to help the District 12 tributes as part of her school assignment, and because the stylist is just completely out of his mind and Effie wants the sister to get a good grade, she ends up stepping in and helping out. She definitely has the capital mentality that the games should happen, that it is just the way things are, as deeply as the propaganda is ingrained into Effie. She doesn't have the cruelty that Drusilla has, and she doesn't seem to treat Haymitch and the other tributes as animals. She still sees them and treats them as people, which I think that makes it possible for Effie to eventually see the reality of what the Capitol has been doing and to flip the switch in Catching Fire and Mockingjay and realize that these games are not the way to accomplish and to maintain peace. We end up going to the tribute parade, and just like in Katniss and Peeta's Hunger Games, the tributes are in these chariots pulled by horses, and they are being paraded in front of the Capitol people. What ends up happening is that the District 12 chariot has an accident. Luella falls off of the chariot and she hits her head and she dies. Now, we basically have a repeat of what happens at the District 12 reaping, because we are once again down one tribute from 12, and it is once again the Capitol showing its incompetence. And if there is anything that President Snow hates more than music, the Covey, eventually Katniss, it is incompetence. Even though, funnily enough, competence is what ends up getting Snow killed and the games discontinued, but we'll talk about it. So yeah, he hates the fact that there was a little mishap and a child died before he had a chance for the arena to kill said child, and that's not right in his eyes. So what they end up doing is they end up presenting the other three tributes, meaning Haymitch, Maisley, and Wyatt, with a replacement Luella. So basically, this is a girl who they eventually, through the songs that she sings and the food that she gravitates toward, they realize that she must have been from District 11. And I wasn't able to exactly figure out what they did, meaning did they take a child and do some kind of plastic surgery on them to make them look like Luella, or if they used Luella's actual skin and put that on a different child. Like, I don't know what kind of sadistic, crazy, process they put this poor child, or actually two children, through. But Haymitch explains that this girl looks like Luella, but they can tell that she's not. And also there is some kind of an apparatus attached to Luella's, or actually they end up calling her Lulu, to Lulu's chest, that probably keeps her alive, that probably punishes her whenever she does something she's not supposed to. And it seems like she is also being fed lines because she repeats that she's called Luella, that she's from District 12, but she doesn't seem to be able to come up with like cohesive thoughts. And there's also a sense that I got that maybe there is a part of the District 11 girls' consciousness still in there, because again, like, she remembers the harvesting songs that they would sing, and she again gravitates towards certain type of bread. So she remembers, like, she's still in there, but the capital is also in there, and then I assume maybe a part of Luella is in there. So it's almost like a Frankenstein's monster kind of a situation where they take two kids and they mash them together because, again, they can't appear weak. They cannot destroy the narrative. Like, the narrative and the propaganda comes above anything else, even though the other tributes and their prep team, by the way, I should mention that some people who we already know make an appearance in this book, like Mags and Wirus and Beatty. Oh my god, once we talk about Beatty. So they make an appearance, and they are the people who end up helping Haymitch and his fellow tributes to get through this entire debacle. And basically all of them end up taking Lulu under their wing. Like, they maybe are a little scared of her because she's very unpredictable, and they don't know exactly who she is and what she thinks, if she's listening to them, if the capital is listening to them through her, but she's still physically a child, and they protect her, they take care of her, before the games, in the games. These are the horrors that we experience even before we get to the games, and I was already like at capacity. I was like, what else are you going to throw my way? Because I don't know if I can handle it. But aside from the Hunger Games being kind of front and center, we actually have a revolution on our hands as well, or at least an attempt at a revolution. Beatty has already participated in his games, and Beatty we meet in Catching Fire, and he is extremely smart, and he's very good with technology, and he ends up winning his games by essentially using the arena against the game makers in the capital. Again, the capital doesn't like to be challenged. Beatty's own son is reaped. His son Ampert is one of the tributes. Beatty is again made part of the team, so he is going to be helping these kids prepare. And Beatty goes into this already knowing that Ampert is not going to win because Ampert is in the games as a punishment for Beatty. And Ampart is very young, he's very bright, and he is excited to help with this revolution. But the fact is that even his father knows that he's not going to come out of this alive. And on top of that, Beatty tells this to Haymitch. But the revolution is actually what ends up keeping Haymitch, I want to say, locked in, because he takes on a task to help with the revolution. So when I say the revolution, what I mean is that Beatty, Ampert, and some other people are trying to damage, or actually to blow up the arena, and their hope is that that is going to stop the games. I'm not going to get into the nitty-gritty of the plan, but essentially they are planning to bomb the arena and flood it, and then once it floods, that's going to destroy the, like, I guess the brain of the arena, and then the whole thing is going to malfunction and shut down. I will touch on this again when I talk about why I think that Haymitch had to fail for Katniss to then succeed years later. But yeah, that is essentially what they're planning to do. And once again, Haymitch is going to play a part in making sure that the arena malfunctions, and he knows that by going into, so maybe I will mention a part of it. Basically he's supposed to find the area through which the mutts come out, and he's supposed to, I think, go down there and plant an explosive, but he knows that when he does, once the explosion happens, he will likely perish in the explosion. But I think the way that he sees it is that it's much more worth it to die having done something very meaningful rather than die by other means. So at least he feels like he's going to have purpose being in the arena if he's able to, you know, participate in the destruction of it. So the plan to cause the explosion consists of different steps that they have to take. So it's pretty intricate, but essentially as that is happening and as Haymitch is trying to stay alive and to figure out the actual arena. Actually, it's very similar to the Catching Fire arena now that I think about it, because there's like animals and flowers and lots of greenery. Everything seems to want to kill you. I guess this could be a good segue into talking about some of the deaths, because again, as Haymitch and Ampart and the other tributes are working toward making this revolution happen within the arena, there's the actual games taking place as well. So I'm not going to talk about all of them because again, there is double the amount of tributes and not all of them get a lot of time on the page. So we're going to run through the ones that really stood out to me the most. We have Wyatt from District 12 who dies protecting Lulu from, I think, Panache. Panache is one of the careers. We also lose Lulu, so because like I mentioned, Lulu is from District 11 and there are many different types of plants in this arena. She notices a plant called the bee balm plant. Back home, this plant is used for healing purposes. She gravitates toward that plant and the plant ends up killing poor Lulu. Beatty's son Ampart obviously also loses his life, and I have no idea how I'm going to watch this scene in a movie theater once the movie comes out, because it is just so disturbing. It was disturbing on the page, but I think it's probably going to be even more disturbing to actually see it on a screen, because again, he is working with Haymitch to blow up a part of the arena to then flood the rest of it, and he ends up being taken out by these squirrel mutts that eat him pretty much clean to the bone, where it is just his skeleton that's left over. Panache, one of the careers, is killed by Maisley with a blow dart. A lot of the kids die because of the surroundings, like they eat the fruits or they drink the water that's poisonous, so they just die of, I guess, what you would consider in this case natural causes, because it's just the environment. It's not, you know, them killing each other. So there is a point in the games where the tributes end up killing 3 game makers who I think come in to fix the arena, and Maisley is one of those tributes who are in the mix, and obviously the Capitol doesn't take lightly to what she's done, and just like with Ampart, she's got a target on her back, even more so than she already did just by being in the games. And the way that she dies is very symbolic, I feel like, because what ends up happening to Maisley is that birds with long beaks, she ends up getting her throat pierced by one of their beaks. I think just like with Ampert, the bird is probably programmed to specifically attack Maisley, and I think it relates back to the bird symbolism, but also because Maisley was so outspoken and she was so just unapologetically herself, just such a queen. I wonder if it's also symbolic that she died by having her throat, the part of the body that, or one of the parts of the body that allows you to speak. So definitely something to think about. I think because Haymitch has a younger brother, Sid, back home, and he loves his brother so much. Losing the littles, like the very little kids, had even more of an impact on him. Like, for example, losing Luella and then losing Lulu. So obviously the book had to end on him losing another kid that he was protecting, and that is Welly. So Welly ends up also meeting a very gruesome end. And I think she's also a career Silka. I'm not sure if I can say this word on YouTube, but she ends up taking Welly's head clean off. It comes off. That's all I'm gonna say. This is just too much for Haymitch to handle, because by this point he's lost Wyatt, he's lost Maisley, he's lost Luella. He was not successful in the revolution attempt, because I don't think I mentioned this, but there was damage done to the arena, but it didn't completely flood. There was also a volcano explosion. Like, a lot happened, and the odds were not in Haymitch's favor, in a sense that he was not able to accomplish what he set off to accomplish in the arena. And yeah, he's still alive, but he's already so damaged by all of the loss that he experienced. It's only Haymitch and Silka who remain, and Haymitch ends up using the force field that's around the arena. He technically kills Silka, but essentially he throws an axe and it bounces off of the force field, and then it hits Silka, and then she dies, and then he wins. And by that point I was like, okay, I went through a roller coaster of emotions. I am traumatized, I am stressed and depressed, but there were plenty of pages left in this book. And actually, before Haymitch went into the arena, he went to Plutarch Heavensby's house, and he ended up meeting President Snow, and they did not have a good interaction, because there is actually something specific tying Snow to Haymitch, and that is the Covey ladies, because obviously Snow can't forget what happened with Lucy Gray, because he is so set on having control, and Lucy Gray is and has been and will always be the one thing that he's not been able to control. And he also knows that Haymitch has a Covey girl back home, Lenore Dove. It's not just because Haymitch does not support the Capitol, he wants to rebel. When Luella dies, he, I think, lifts her body and shows it to Snow to be like, look at what you did. So there is a defiance in him, which Snow just automatically doesn't like, but then there is that connection with him also loving a Covey girl that just like cuts Snow like a knife, and really triggers him. I actually want to read a bit of the chapter where Haymitch and Snow interact. Snow is already not in a very good place, because we later learn in the later books that he would often poison his opponents, and he would also eat whatever was poisoned, but he, I guess, built up some kind of an immunity to it, but he would still get sick. So when he comes to Plutarch's house, he's poisoned himself as a way to poison someone else and kill them. So he's not feeling the best, and he wants milk because milk supposedly helps to settle whatever, queasiness and sickness he feels. And Haymitch really can't do anything to Snow. Like, he can't kill him, he can't defy him in any other way than to drink the milk that was in the fridge. And he then comes out, he's like, there is no milk for you to drink. But I think Snow knew what Haymitch did, so the milk and Lenore Dove, the Covey connection, the District 12 connection, there's a lot stacked against Haymitch right off the bat. Snow ends up guessing Lenore Dove's full name because the Covey tend to name their kids based off poems. Lucy Gray is a character in a poem, and Lenore is also a name that's pulled from The Raven by Edgar Allan Poe. Snow, as they're talking about Lenore, he says, all the birds I've encountered are vicious. A dribble of bloody spittle leaks from Snow's mouth. Bet I know a thing or two about your dove. Like what? Like she's delightful to look at, swishes around in bright colors, and sings like a mockingjay. You love her, and oh, how she seems to love you. Except sometimes you wonder, because her plans don't include you at all. So this is definitely Snow projecting because he thinks that he was betrayed by Lucy Gray. Not that he really cares about Haymitch's love life. I think Snow is delighted to hear that Haymitch does have somebody that he loves back home. And I guess this was my long-winded way of getting myself back to what I was trying to get into, which is that while the games are over, and now it's supposed to be a time to try to find a way to move forward, but the last part of the book is what completely broke me for multiple reasons. So I think we'll just run through them, and then I can maybe segue into the Raven discussion because that's directly connected to Lenore Dove and Haymitch's fate. So Haymitch gets hurt in the arena, he gets sepsis, he's treated, but then as he's being treated, he also is forced to watch reruns of the Hunger Games, and it's just like the most horrific clips put together for his viewing pleasures. We can maybe actually talk about the propaganda aspect of it now, because even though he just went through something horrific and he lost so many people, he also is realizing that all of the brave things, all of the good things that he did in the arena, like him trying to save the kids, like him building alliances, like him trying to blow up the arena and to end the games, to him just being a good person in the arena, all of these things have been effectively erased because Plutarch and whoever else is responsible for putting together the footage that then the Capitol and the rest of the districts see. He really played with his Adobe Premiere and Filmora and Windows Movie Maker because according to Haymitch, the way that the footage is presented does not reflect what actually happened in the arena. So just like when they had Woodbine get shot at the Reaping and they made Haymitch's mom and brother act things out and they put together a reel that did not represent the actual Reaping, the same thing happened with the games. The games are again completely misrepresented. All of the days are mixed up, people's intentions are being completely shown in a very different way. The deaths don't happen like they happened, and Haymitch realizes that because all of the people who were at the games with him are now dead, nobody's ever going to know what Haymitch's real intentions were. Whatever he did in the arena, it reflected the actual Haymitch, the protective, the sensitive, the caring Haymitch, and none of that is reflected in the actual footage that the people got to see. And basically the only person who knows how things actually happened, how these people died, how he acted, who he is him and Snow and Plutarch. But obviously those clips will never see the light of day. So it is essentially just Haymitch. So again, he almost died from sepsis. He's now healing. He's being tortured with this very messed up narrative that he's seeing on the TV. And then he eventually is transported back to District 12. Like, some things happen in between, but I'm trying to summarize. And he realizes that his house is on fire, and his mother, who is only 35 by the way, and his brother Sid are in the house, and they end up perishing in the fire. Not only has Haymitch witnessed just the most intense brutality, he witnessed death, he was attacked, he had to kill, so he had to take lives. He almost died, and then the moment he is supposed to have some kind of a safe space or like a moment of peace, he basically comes home to bury his mother and his brother. I listened to this book on audiobook on Audible. The narrator, the way that he shouted Ma, Sid, Ma, as Haymitch was realizing that they were trapped, and you know, when the people who rushed to help couldn't pull them out. Like, Suzanne, what the hell? I guess we can transition into talking about Lenore Dove. So technically, Lenore Dove is the only person who is left that he loves. I mean, he's got friends, and he's definitely not like Katniss, in a sense where Katniss was naturally very closed off and hardened by the life that she was living. Haymitch had a community, which is not the case at the end of the book. Throughout the book, she actually has been arrested because, once again, she partook in some shady activities that are not really shady, but activities that the Capitol and the Peacekeepers don't love. But she's been released. Eventually, Haymitch and Lenore end up reuniting, and it should be a joyous moment, as joyous as it can be. But that is where the Raven comes in. So throughout the entire book, Haymitch is recalling a poem that Lenore is named after, which is The Raven by Edgar Allan Poe. And if you've not read the poem is about a man who's lost his love, and her name is Lenore, and he is just in the depths of grief, and there's this raven who comes, and the way that I interpret it, he taunts the man by saying nevermore, nevermore, as the man is thinking about Lenore, and, you know, whether he'll see Lenore in the next life, and whether she's actually dead. Like, there's all these thoughts are flowing through his head, and the raven is just there repeating over and over, nevermore, almost driving the man to the point of insanity. The fact that Lenore is named after the raven, and this is the context, it should have already been a very big clue that Lenore and Haymitch were not going to have a happy ending. Just like Lucy Gray was named after a poem about a girl who went missing and nobody knows whether she's dead or alive, which obviously is the fate that Lucy Gray meets in The Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes. And I mean, I was kind of expecting it, but there are so many layers with what happens, and the connections to the poem are just so beautifully done that I just have to talk about it. So Haymitch had arranged for Sid to bring Lenore a bag of gumdrops, and when they meet in the field, she's like, I've got these gumdrops. I should open up the bag, because I think she forgot that she had them. And Haymitch, he ends up feeding Lenore the gumdrops. As soon as he does, he realizes that these are not the gumdrops that he had Sid delivered. That these gumdrops are red, the same shade of red as President Snow's roses. And he connects the dots, but he connects them too late because they don't have any antidote, anything to help Lenore Dove survive, and she effectively dies in his arms. And there's such an interesting rhythm to how Suzanne Collins writes this scene, and actually throughout the book how she is incorporating the Raven, the poem, in her own writing, because at first you get just a snippet of the poem, like a stanza, a couple of lines, and then as we get closer to Lenore's death, the frequency at which we get different sections of the poem increases. I'm not sure if it felt that way if you read the physical copy, but listening to it on audiobook, it felt like this, almost like an attack. The way that Haymitch is reciting the poem, I think it perfectly summed up him slipping into grief and then sort of getting stuck in his grief. So I just lost a nail. I'm literally falling apart. But let's talk about the parallels between the Raven and Lenore and Haymitch's story. What I think Suzanne Collins was trying to say by including this poem in the book. So actually, if you got the Barnes & Noble edition, it includes an interview with Suzanne Collins, and one of the things that she talks about is how she named Lenore. So she knew that she wanted to name Haymitch's love based off of a poem, and she had a few poems to choose from, and she ended up going with the Raven. So I'm kind of actually curious now what the story would have been if she went with a different poem, but I feel like the Raven was the perfect choice because there are just so many interesting aspects of the poem that completely line up with Haymitch and Lenore and their story. So again, the Raven is all about losing somebody that you love, grief, misery, losing your sanity, and having something constantly trigger you and almost reminding you of the grief, like you just can't escape it. So there definitely is the bird connection, because again, the mockingjays, the jabberjays, birds are such a huge aspect of the series, and to have the Raven tied into it feels right. I mentioned losing your sanity and madness is also a big part of the Raven poem. In the book, Haymitch does mention that he keeps seeing Lenore, that he grows old with Lenore, and she's always there. So even though he is eventually able to become a good mentor to Katniss and to Peeta and to play his part in making sure that a revolution happens and they achieve what they're supposed to achieve, Lenore is always there. A ghost of Lenore continues to follow him. So something that I forgot to mention is that in the beginning of the book, Haymitch highlights the fact that yes, he works with alcohol, however, he does not drink. And as we know, Haymitch in the Hunger Games trilogy is hitting the bottle very, very hard. And it's another one of those very heartbreaking things because in the Hunger Games books, Haymitch doesn't just drink for the fun of it, that he is numbing something that he's feeling. And now that we've read Sunrise on the Reaping, we know that he is trying to numb the pain of losing all of the people in the games, of losing his mom, his brother, and Lenore, the life that he thought he was going to live. So in the poem, there is a mention of Nepenthe in the Raven, the poem, and I looked into it, and Nepenthe is a potion of forgetfulness in Greek mythology. So I think that directly then relates to Haymitch choosing to numb his insanely intense pain of losing his loved ones with alcohol. So there's also that parallel. So many different ways to read a poem and to find these bridges and connections. But the way that I see the raven represented in Sunrise on the Reaping is that Haymitch makes Lenore a promise to make sure that there's not another sunrise on the reaping, meaning that she wants him to do everything in his power to stop the Hunger Games. And I think that he would even prefer to follow Lenore, meaning to end his life, but it's that promise that keeps Haymitch around. Just like in the poem, the man cannot forget because the raven is always there to pull him back into the grief. In Haymitch's situation, the promise keeps him alive and keeps him constantly living through the grief. So I think that there definitely is that parallel, the raven and the promise. Last but not least, in the poem, the man is struggling to figure out if he is going to see Lenore in the afterlife. In Sunrise, there is mention of the afterlife. In the poem, again, he is very ambiguous whether he will be able to see her or whether he's just going to be in grief and suffering and then he'll die and then he won't see Lenore even once that happens. And I think that the raven is a big part of keeping that fear alive in the man in the poem. But I think that in Sunrise on the Reaping, Suzanne Collins wants to infuse some hope into the story. It's already the times after the revolution. They've been able to successfully end the Hunger Games, and as a result, Haymitch fulfilled his promise to Lenore. He seems to feel like she's at peace and he's at peace, and he believes that he will see Lenore in the afterlife. So while the man in the poem is tortured by these thoughts of will I, won't I, Haymitch, through staying alive and helping Katniss, helping Peeta, suffering, because I think that for him living without his mom, brother, and Lenore, he's in a constant state of suffering. I think by clinging to hope, by clinging to keeping these kids alive and succeeding and making sure that more kids don't have to go through the same fate that he went through and his fellow tributes went through, that is what helps him defeat the raven, defeat the doubt that he had. And again, while the raven, the poem, has a very hopeless feeling to it, I feel like the epilogue of Sunrise definitely gives you a sense of hope. The raven is an omen of death, but in the epilogue, Katniss brings Haymitch goose eggs, and in the book, Lenore loved her geese. She was a geese girl for sure, and I think it's very symbolic that Haymitch gets these goose eggs from Katniss. They're not eggs to eat, they're eggs that are supposed to hatch. It's essentially new life, new hope, new purpose until he is once again able to meet Lenore in another life. So I don't even know how long I've been sitting here and chatting, but I should mention Haymitch and Katniss. I've always found their relationship so interesting because they definitely bickered a lot, but I also feel like they were the most connected and on the same page. I think that they understood each other better than anyone else, any other duo in the book. And I think that's because they have such similar stories, and there's so much overlap between them. For example, Haymitch knew both of Katniss's parents. They have very similar family dynamics, meaning that Haymitch had a mom and a younger brother, and then Katniss had her mom and a younger sister. But in an interesting twist, the way that Haymitch begins his story and the way that Katniss is in the beginning of the Hunger Games, the polar opposites, because Haymitch still is able to cling to hope that there is going to be a better life for them eventually. He is open to the possibility of getting married, and I think that's partly because Haymitch's mom is still very much present in their lives, meaning she works, she takes care of them, and they still have a healthy family dynamic. Meanwhile, Katniss, when we meet her, I would say she is more similar to how Haymitch is at the end of the book. Maybe she's not as angry, but she is very hardened. She is very hardened by the fact that she can't depend on her mom to take care of them, so she is the one who hunts, who feeds them. She almost doesn't even have space to want things. All she thinks about is survival. While Haymitch has Lenore and he has friends, so it's almost as if where Haymitch ends is where Katniss begins in the Hunger Games book. But I think, again, they're just so interconnected to the point where at the end of Mockingjay, when they're voting whether they should have one last Hunger Games with the Capital kids, and Katniss says yes, Haymitch, who's been through multiple Hunger Games and he's mentored kids who should be one of the people to be like, no, absolutely not. He is like, I am with Katniss. Let's do it, because he knows that Katniss has something up her sleeve. I'm actually pretty excited to maybe even reread the Hunger Games trilogy. I'm rewatching the movies now just to find more areas where Haymitch and Katniss really kind of get each other, you know? So I want to touch on two more things that I think are pretty fascinating. So actually, let's talk about the title of this video, which is why Haymitch had to lose for Katniss to win. And what I'm referring to is the revolution. So I think that the answer is pretty simple, and if you have other things to share, I would love to see what you think. But I think that the idea of a revolution was great and it was needed, but I think that Haymitch was always going to lose, because when you think about it, even if they successfully blew up the arena, maybe they could have managed to escape and hide, but would blowing up the arena really have led to the Capitol standing down and being like, okay, we made a mistake, you should be free, the Hunger Games are canceled? I don't think so. I think that they would have still leaned on the propaganda to somehow position what happened as the districts being ungrateful and beastly and dangerous, and it would have still blown back on the innocent people. They seemingly didn't really have a plan of what to do once the arena was blown up, because like Plutarch said, they don't have an army. So they can't fight the Capitol, even though there's definitely more people in the districts. They don't have like a organized army. By that point, the district people were more than fed up with the games and the treatment that they were receiving. But I think that they needed to rally around someone, and they got that in Katniss, you know, the girl on fire, the Mockingjay. Personality wise, I feel like Haymitch would have actually been the more likable symbol, and Mockingjay more palatable, I guess. But I think that with so many years going by and things not changing, and with Katniss really embodying the Mockingjay when she was her angriest, I think that that really reflected what the people were collectively feeling. And again, with them then having District 13, as in having an army, everybody also seeing Katniss defy the Capitol, because obviously at the end of the Hunger Games, she decides, well, if both Peeta and I can't win together, then the Capitol is not going to have a victor at all. And her act of defiance actually was televised. It wasn't cut out, so people got to see it. So I think the propaganda also played a part in Haymitch's revolution failing, which is interesting because Plutarch was a part of both of the revolutions, but he kind of shot himself in the foot the first time because he had to cut out Haymitch helping the tributes and doing so much, but the people never got to see it. And then with Katniss, they did. So I feel like her very much publicized act of defiance, and actually also Haymitch coaching Katniss on the propaganda aspect of it, because I don't think she would have made it as far as she did had she not had Haymitch go through what he went through and have all of this knowledge that he could then impart on Katniss. I think that the defiance, the army, her being positioned as a symbol, the people's anger, all of it combined led to Katniss succeeding. Using Suzanne Collins's own words, the odds were simply in Katniss's favor. I think this is everything that I want to mention in this video. I hope that you enjoyed it and were able to get something out of it. If there are any other books that you think I might like and you might want me to analyze and to make a video just like this, then definitely drop your suggestions in the comments down below. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in my next video.